Welcome back to Sip and Talk.
And hi, everyone.
Grab your coffee because we've got a whole globe's worth of news to chew through today.
Absolutely. We're doing our international news speed round. Going to hit everything from Trump's tariffs, other global headlines, to some interesting stuff happening with U.S. laws, and, yeah, of course, what Elon Musk is up to.
Okay.
We're basically looking at the last few days, sort of May 20th to the 22nd, 2025. Should be a wild ride. Okay,
buckle up then. Let's jump right into those tariffs. Now, just to set the stage, it's 2025. President Trump is in office.
Right.
His tariff policies are still causing a lot of buzz. And just in the past 3 days, we've seen diplomatic back and forth. Some talk about how the potential impacts on prices and even some legal challenges popping up. It's like this never-ending story.
Yeah, it really is. And what's really interesting about these tariffs is the constant push and pull. You know, You've got these economic theories suggesting, well, we might see higher prices for everyday stuff and disruptions in how goods get from point A to point B internationally.
Right, the supply chain stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then the big question is always, how much of that are we actually seeing in our wallets? Is it like a huge deal or just a little bit?
Exactly. It's not a simple yes or no answer, is it? Businesses, governments around the world, they're reacting in all sorts of ways. Some happy, some not so much.
Which really just shows you how complicated this whole tariff thing is.
Yeah.
And it's this complexity that's probably driving some of the legislative action we're seeing now, like the Anti-Non-Market Economy Tariff Evasion Act, the Anti-Act.
Anti-Act, right. Sounds like policymakers are trying to plug some holes before they become, like, major problems. So this new bill, it's from Republican Senators Arrington of Texas and Banks of Indiana, and it's all about stopping Chinese state-owned companies from, dodging Trump's tariffs.
How are they supposedly doing that?
By sending their goods through other countries and then just, slapping a new label on them, trying to pull a fast one on customs.
The old relabeling trick.
Exactly.
The backstory there is actually pretty fascinating and, a little concerning. There are these claims that the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, is using what they call country of origin washing.
Country of origin washing?
Yeah, basically just lying about where a product actually comes from to avoid these tariffs. It's like a high-stakes game of hide-and-seek in global trade.
Wow. And it's not just rumors.
Apparently not. South Korean customs have reportedly seen more of these sneaky tactics, and even the Financial Times mentioned ads popping up on Chinese social media, like offering help with this tariff evasion.
No way. They're advertising how to break the rules.
Can you believe it? It really highlights how tough it can be to enforce tariffs, right? Just putting a tax in place isn't enough. You need these strong systems to make sure everyone is actually playing by the rules and not, finding workarounds.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, switching gears, but staying in the U.S. for a bit. Trump's tax reform and budget bill, it just barely scraped through the House.
How close was it?
Super close, 215 to 214. And one person abstained, just threw their hands up.
Wow, a real squeaker. And the potential effects of this bill are getting a lot of attention, I bet.
Oh, yeah. The Penn Wharton budget model did some number crunching, and their analysis points to some pretty significant, though pretty uneven impacts on different income groups.
Okay, break it down for us.
Yeah, so according to their model, the wealthiest 20% of families, especially the younger folks in that group, could see a one-time boost of over $100,000.
Over $100,000. Wow.
Yeah, because of these tax cuts. That's a serious chunk of change that could, help someone put a down payment on a house or invest heavily.
But there's always another side to the coin, right?
Always. The bottom 20% of income earners, again, especially younger people, might actually see average losses in the tens of thousands of dollars.
Ouch. So a potential widening of the income gap there?
It really brings home how tax policies can have very different outcomes for different segments of the population.
Definitely.
And the idea behind this, as some people see it, isn't just about lowering the total amount of debt, like the absolute number.
Right.
The thinking might be that these big tax cuts could really juice the economy, and that faster growth would then make the debt seem smaller relative to the overall size of the economy, the debt to GDP ratio.
So grow your way out of debt, basically.
Yeah, it's a different way of tackling the national debt than just trying to, say, slash spending.
That's a core idea in what economists call supply-side economics, right? The hope is that by giving businesses and wealthier folks more money, they'll invest more, create jobs, and ultimately generate enough economic activity to outgrow the debt.
Exactly.
But whether that actually happens and how much, that's always the big debate among economists.
Always is. Right. Now let's talk about something that feels pretty politically charged. The Trump administration has officially revoked Harvard University's ability to enroll international students.
Wait, revoke their SEVP authorization? Seriously?
Yeah. Effectively banning Harvard from enrolling new international students. We're talking about maybe 6,800 students who could be affected.
Wow, that's huge. That's a lot of brain power potentially looking elsewhere.
It really is.
This is a really significant move. It sends a strong message, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Could suggest a broader shift in how the government views and interacts with these top-tier academic institutions, especially ones with big international student bodies.
Yeah, you can see how it could strain the relationship with like highly educated people who often really value that international collaboration and exchange.
Absolutely. And Harvard isn't just rolling over, right?
Nope, not taking this quietly. Yeah. They've already filed a lawsuit against the government. You can bet they'll argue this is politically motivated and doesn't have a solid legal basis. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the courts.
Yeah, definitely one to watch. Interestingly, there's also mention I saw of a number of Chinese espionage cases maybe being a contributing factor.
Oh, really?
Yeah, as a possible reason behind this decision. If that's indeed a significant factor, it adds another whole layer to it, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Brings in national security concerns alongside the questions of academic freedom and global education.
It definitely makes things way more complicated. Okay, let's switch gears again, this time to the world of digital money, crypto.
Okay.
The U.S. Senate has passed something called the Guiding and Establishing National Innovation for U.S. Stablecoins Act. Thankfully, people are just calling it the Genius Act.
Genius Act. Catchy.
Yeah.
Sounds like a pretty big step for crypto in the U.S.
Seems like it.
It is a major development. This is the first time we've seen like comprehensive federal regulation specifically for stablecoins in the United States. Until now, it's been a bit of a patchwork, state laws, different interpretation.
Right, kind of the Wild West.
Exactly. So this aims to create a more consistent set of rules across the board.
So what's the lowdown on this Genius Act? What are the key things it actually does?
Okay, well, a few really important things. First off, it sets rules for the reserves that stablecoin companies have to hold.
The backing.
Precisely. They basically need to have enough safe and easily accessible assets, like cash or cash equivalents, to back up the value of their stablecoins. 1-to-1, ideally.
Makes sense.
And they also have to undergo regular audits to prove they actually have these reserves. This is all about making sure these digital currencies can actually hold their promised stable value. If everyone suddenly decided they wanted to cash out at once.
The money would actually be there.
Yeah, the money would actually be there. You don't want a stable coin suddenly becoming unstable and cratering in value.
No kidding. What else is in the act?
It also strengthens the rules around anti-money laundering, AML, and national security. So expect tougher Know Your Customer, or KYC, regulations. Basically, the companies issuing these stablecoins will need to do a better job verifying who their users are to prevent these digital currencies from being used for, illicit activities. Plus, there are new measures to protect consumers, like making sure people get more information about how stablecoins work and the risks involved.
Yeah.
More transparency.
Good to see some protections in there for regular folks who might be using these new technologies. Anything else noteworthy?
Yes, actually. There are stricter rules for non-financial publicly traded companies that might want to issue stablecoins.
Oh, interesting. Like who?
Well, anyone whose main business isn't finance, if they want to get into the stablecoin game, they'll have to meet some pretty high standards related to managing financial risk, protecting user data, making sure their business practices are fair, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And finally, there are rules about what you can call your stablecoin. You can't use names that might mislead people into thinking the government or the FDIC is guaranteeing its value.
Right, no calling it FedCoin or something.
Exactly.
So how has the crypto world reacted to all this? Are they like popping champagne bottles or nervously biting their nails?
Interestingly, it seems like a pretty positive reaction overall for the cryptocurrency market. Bitcoin, for example, saw a significant jump in price.
Really?
Yeah, hit a new high of around $111,000 after the act passed.
Wow. $111,000.
Yeah. It suggests that the market actually sees clear rules, even if they're strict, as a good thing for the long-term growth and legitimacy of digital assets. It gives businesses a framework they can actually work within.
So it brings some clarity, some predictability, maybe?
That seems to be the view. And it's not just the crypto-native companies.
No.
We're also hearing that some big traditional financial institutions, think like JP Morgan Chase, Citigroup, they're considering getting into the stablecoin business themselves.
The big banks.
Yeah, maybe even issuing them jointly. They see a new opportunity in this now more regulated space. It's kind of like the grown-ups are finally coming to the digital currency playground now that there are some rules posted.
Makes sense. But there's always a catch, right? Any potential roadblocks or controversies brewing?
Of course, it wouldn't be D.C. without some controversy. There's still some political disagreement. Some Democrats, like Senator Elizabeth Warren, have raised concerns.
About what?
That these regulations might inadvertently benefit people like President Trump, given his past dealings with cryptocurrency ventures. They're calling for stronger ethical guidelines.
Okay, so some political pushback.
Yeah, and plus there's the possibility of leadership changes at the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, the CFTC. That could affect how these new rules are actually enforced down the line. You know, the details of implementation are always crucial.
Right, the devil's in the details. So zooming out, what's the big picture for stablecoins now in the U.S.?
Well, the Genius Act is a really important step for the U.S. in the world of digital finance. It could potentially encourage other countries to create similar regulations, which in turn could lead to a more stable and hopefully trustworthy global cryptocurrency market. But, big caveat, it still needs to pass the House of Representatives.
Right. Not law yet.
Not law yet. And there are always political and regulatory twists and turns that could happen along the way. It's definitely not a done deal.
Okay, got it. All right, let's move on from laws to a guy who often finds himself right in the middle of business and politics, Elon Musk.
Yes. Never a dull moment there.
Apparently, he's taking on a formal role as a government advisor now, dedicating a significant chunk of his week to it. That's kind of unexpected, isn't it?
Yeah, reports indicate he's spending about 1 to 2 days a week on government duties.
1 to 2 days.
Yeah, involves traveling, meeting with cabinet members, maybe even the president. That's a decent amount of his time going to public service, alongside, running Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink X.
Everything else, yeah. And he's part of an advisory group called Doge. That's a choice for a name.
It is certainly a memorable name.
What exactly is this Doge group doing? Is it as memey as it sounds?
Well, while the name might raise a chuckle, Doge is actually focused on the pretty serious task of reviewing how efficiently government departments are operating.
Okay.
And whether they're getting good value for the contracts they're awarding. So the aim is to find ways to cut waste and make sure taxpayer money is being used wisely. Think of it as like a government efficiency consulting group with a catchy internet-y name.
Okay, efficiency hunters. Got it. So Musk is now wearing a government hat, but he's still very much in charge at Tesla, right? There were reports about him committing to stay on as CEO.
That's right.
You can't really picture Tesla without him at the helm.
Totally. He's publicly stated that he intends to remain Tesla's CEO for the next 5 years.
Okay.
And his reasoning seems to be less about his salary, which is famously low, and more about maintaining enough voting power to steer the company.
Control.
That's exactly. Especially when it comes to the big, ambitious projects like those humanoid robots they're developing, Optimus. He wants to ensure his vision for the company can actually be realized without shareholder interference, perhaps.
Makes sense. Okay, Tesla sales. What's the latest from the top? There's been a lot of chatter about the electric vehicle markets slowing down recently. Are they hitting their targets?
Well, Musk says the situation has gotten better. Although he does acknowledge that Europe is a bit of a weak spot for them right now. He called it the weakest market. However, he insists that sales in other parts of the world are strong and that they aren't facing like a major overall shortage of sales.
Okay.
And the fact that Tesla's stock price is still pretty high, near historical highs actually, seems to reflect some confidence in the market about their current position.
Right. The market seems to agree with him for now. Now, on a more personal note, it sounds like Musk has been feeling some negative feedback lately. He mentioned being deeply hurt by some of the recent criticism against Tesla.
Yeah. And even regretting some of his political activities. That's a bit of a different tone than we usually hear from him, isn't it?
It really is. It makes him sound almost human.
It does. He's described some of the actions against his companies as massive violence and has even spoken about receiving personal threats.
Wow.
He specifically called out attacks on Tesla showrooms as unacceptable and said that those responsible, including, he suggested, the people funding and organizing these actions, should face jail time.
So he's drawing a really clear line there.
Yeah, between disagreeing with someone's political views, which he says is fine, a normal part of things, and resorting to violence or threats, which he strongly condemns. It's a pretty firm stance.
Yeah, it's an important distinction to make.
Definitely. Now, moving on to another significant legal battle involving Musk, his lawsuit against OpenAI.
Right, the AI company he helped start. What's the core of his argument there? What's got him so riled up?
Well, he's basically saying that when he helped co-found OpenAI, the whole idea, the core mission, was that it would be a nonprofit, open-source organization for the benefit of humanity.
Okay.
He even claims he put in an initial $50 million to get it going.
Right.
But now, he argues, OpenAI is trying to, pull a switcheroo. They're attempting to transform into a closed-source, for-profit company, mainly, he claims, for financial gain, particularly benefiting Microsoft, their major partner. He feels like they've completely betrayed their original mission.
Betrayed the mission.
He uses a pretty strong analogy to make his point. He compared it to setting up an organization to protect rainforests that then turns around and becomes a logging company.
Ooh. Yeah, that paints a picture.
It really emphasizes his feeling that OpenAI has gone against its foundational principles.
Okay. And what are his general thoughts on regulation? We know he's not shy about sharing his opinions on that topic.
No, definitely not. He reiterated his belief that emerging fields like artificial intelligence are currently underregulated.
Underregulated. Interesting.
Yeah, and could benefit from some oversight. He compared regulatory bodies to referees in a sports game. You need them there to make sure things are fair and safe.
Okay, so some rules are good.
But he contrasts this sharply with industries like automotive or aerospace, which he feels are overregulated.
Too many referees.
Exactly, his analogy. More referees than players, potentially hindering innovation and slowing things down.
He's got a point about how regulations can sometimes become overly complex, right? Especially in established industries, like having so many rules you can't even play the game anymore.
Totally. He has this theory that unnecessary laws and regulations just steadily increase during long periods of prosperity when there isn't some big existential threat forcing you to streamline things.
Interesting theory.
And he even brought up what he sees as a particularly absurd situation under the previous Biden administration.
Okay.
SpaceX apparently being sued for not hiring asylum seekers.
Sued for not hiring them.
Yeah, while at the same time, they're legally prevented from hiring them under ITAR regulations.
ITAR. Those are the strict rules controlling export of sensitive technologies, right? Like rockets.
Exactly. So they couldn't hire them even if they wanted to because it would violate ITAR, but they were getting sued for not hiring them.
That does sound like a bureaucratic nightmare, a real catch-22.
Absolutely.
And just to remind everyone listening, SpaceX isn't building weapons or anything like that, right? Their business isn't military hardware.
Correct. He emphasized that. Their main businesses are launching rockets into space, primarily satellites, providing internet through their Starlink satellite network, and developing the ground terminals people use for Starlink.
Okay. And they're really dominating the space launch industry now, aren't they?
Oh, completely. They're projected to handle a massive 90% of all orbital launches this year.
90%.
90%, which is way, way more than China or, frankly, the rest of the world combined. It just shows how far ahead they are in that particular field, especially with reusable rockets.
It's an incredible lead. And Musk really sees Starlink as something bigger than just a business, doesn't he? He talks about it as having a real positive impact on the world.
He does. He often frames Starlink as a powerful tool for good. Providing global internet access, he argues, can help people in developing countries access knowledge, participate in the global economy, maybe start businesses online, and ultimately improve their lives, help lift people out of poverty. He also mentioned that Starlink is now operating in 130 countries that have officially approved its service, highlighting its pretty widespread global reach now.
130 countries, wow. Now, going back to his role as a government advisor, the obvious question comes up. Could there be conflicts of interest?
Yeah, that's the elephant in the room.
Between him advising the government and running these massive, innovative companies that often do business with or are regulated by the government?
It's a fair question. Musk argues that this kind of advisory role isn't really without precedent in history, and he stresses that he doesn't hold any formal power.
Just advising.
Right. He's just offering his advice, which the president can choose to accept or ignore. He also believes that any shady dealings or improper contract awards involving his companies would immediately become major news headlines.
Public scrutiny as a check.
That seems to be his argument, yeah. That the transparency would act as a safeguard.
And this DOGE advisory group he's part of, what exactly are they looking at when it comes to government contracts? Are they digging into competitors?
He clarified that DOGE's focus is on reviewing the efficiency of government organizations and the value they're getting from their contracts. not on looking into the relationships between the government and specific competitor companies.
Okay, so process and value, not competitive intel.
Right. And he also emphasized that Doge's recommendations are transparent, meaning they're supposedly not happening behind closed doors. They make recommendations, and it's up to the government to act.
Okay. Now, Doge has this pretty ambitious goal of saving $2 trillion. How's that going so far? That sounds like a huge number to save.
It's massive. Musk reported that they've identified around $170 billion in potential savings so far.
$170 billion is still a lot, but it's a long way from $2 trillion.
It is. And he points out that whether those savings actually happen depends entirely on whether the government, both Congress and the executive branch, is willing to actually implement their suggestions.
Right. They're just advisors.
Exactly. After all, Doge is just an advisory group, not a dictatorial power cutting budgets. Despite that, he seems pretty optimistic, calling their progress incredible and excellent, given their purely advisory role.
Okay. Sounds like Musk has a lot on his plate. What are some of the big things he's looking forward to in the near future across his various ventures? He mentioned this year being critical.
Yeah, he really believes this year is crucial. Several major milestones are potentially on the horizon. These include achieving full reusability of the Starship rocket.
The giant one for Mars.
That's the one, which he sees as essential for making life multiplanetary. Also, the first human trials for Neuralink's brain implants, with the goal of restoring lost abilities, maybe even sight eventually. He talked about making significant progress towards artificial general intelligence, AGI, and also launching Tesla's unsupervised full self-driving technology.
Unsupervised FSD, that's the holy grail for them.
It really is. So yeah, it's a very, very ambitious list for just 1 year.
Absolutely. Wow. Okay, let's shift now to a much more serious and somber topic.
Yeah.
The ongoing situation between Russia and Ukraine and the chances for peace talks. It sounds like things, well, they don't seem to be moving in a positive direction.
Sadly, no. Reports suggest that as of May 23, 2025, there really aren't any new direct peace talks planned between Russia and Ukraine, and progress seems extremely limited, if not non-existent. Putin's mentioned he's open to discussing a memorandum, like a framework, about a future peace agreement, but without any clear conditions or specifics, Ukraine is understandably very skeptical.
Yeah, it's like saying you're willing to talk, but not saying what you're willing to talk about, or what you'd give up.
Exactly. It feels vague.
And what about President Trump's claims? He sounded pretty confident, didn't he, that negotiations would start immediately after he spoke with Putin.
He did sound confident. President Trump claimed negotiations would begin right away after a phone call with Putin. However, the Kremlin's response has been pretty vague, kind of non-committal, and crucially, no specific timeline has been announced.
So probably not happening immediately then.
It makes it hard to believe that a major breakthrough is imminent, yeah. And the ongoing fighting, including, unfortunately, recent drone attacks, just further highlights how incredibly difficult it is to envision a peaceful resolution anytime soon.
So if we dig a little deeper, what's the absolute latest on any actual diplomatic efforts? Anything concrete?
Well, as we mentioned, there aren't any new formal negotiation setups to report. That meeting back in Istanbul on May 16th, it only resulted in a prisoner exchange agreement.
Okay, that's something at least.
It is definitely a positive humanitarian step. A significant one, actually, involving 1,000 prisoners of war from each side. The largest so far.
Wow, 1,000 each?
Yeah. But crucially, it didn't lead to any progress on a ceasefire or broader peace terms. And as we discussed, Putin's sort of vague offer to work on a general memorandum without details just hasn't inspired any confidence in Kyiv.
Right. What are Putin's stated conditions for peace anyway? Have they changed at all? They've always seemed like non-starters for Ukraine.
They really haven't changed much, and they remain very unfavorable, basically unacceptable for Ukraine. Things like Ukraine becoming a neutral country, drastically reducing its military, giving up any ambition to ever join NATO, and recognizing the new territorial status quo, which means accepting Russia's annexation of Crimea and its control over other occupied areas in the east and south.
Yeah, hard to see Ukraine ever agreeing to that.
Exactly. And unsurprisingly, Russia also rejected Ukraine's own proposal for a 30-day ceasefire, which had conditions like halting troop mobilization and freezing Western military aid coming into Ukraine.
So basically no common ground on starting points.
Seems that way.
And how have other countries around the world reacted to all this back and forth? It's not just the U.S. involved in trying to find some kind of solution, right?
That's right. While President Trump has been quite vocal about his potential role and his calls with Putin, other world leaders have definitely been involved too. Ursula von der Leyen from the EU, leaders from France, Italy, Germany, Finland. They've all been part of discussions and efforts to support Ukraine and explore diplomatic avenues.
Anyone else?
Even Pope Leo offered the Vatican as a possible neutral location for peace talks. That offer was welcomed by the U.S. and others, but Putin reportedly turned down a separate proposal for talks to happen in Turkey. So you have many different players trying to find a path forward. But so far, just not much success in getting direct negotiations going again.
It really sounds like Ukraine is understandably just deeply wary of Russia's true intentions when it comes to peace.
Absolutely. There's a strong, pervasive sense of doubt coming from Ukraine about whether Putin is genuinely interested in meaningful peace talks at all. Officials like Andriy Yermak, who's a top advisor to President Zelensky, have basically said they believe Putin simply wants the war to continue, not end. And Germany's defense minister Pistorius kind of echoed this sentiment, pointing out the complete lack of any real concessions from Russia, which makes it seem like any talk of peace from Moscow is just a stall tactic, maybe to regroup militarily.
And meanwhile, despite all this talk, potential talks, the fighting on the ground just keeps going, doesn't it?
Tragically, yes. The conflict continues with absolutely no signs of stopping. There was a recent report, horrifyingly, of Russia launching its largest drone attack since the full-scale invasion began, which apparently caused at least 10 deaths in Ukraine.
Oh, that's awful.
It is, and this stark reality on the ground just makes it incredibly difficult to see any clear path to a quick diplomatic solution. Past attempts at ceasefires, remember those? Like around August 8th, 11th last year and during Easter?
Yeah, they never helped.
Exactly. They failed pretty quickly, with both sides accusing each other of breaking the agreements. That has only further damaged any trust that might have existed, making future ceasefires even harder to achieve.
You mentioned the prisoner exchange in Istanbul, though. That does sound like a small bit of good news, at least from a human perspective.
It was definitely a significant and positive event in that sense. The exchange of 1,000 POWs from each side, facilitated by the International Red Cross, is being called a humanitarian breakthrough.
Yeah.
And the images, you probably saw some, of families reuniting after potentially years apart, were incredibly moving. A real moment of relief for those involved.
Absolutely.
However, while it shows that some level of cooperation is still possible, even in the midst of this brutal conflict, it hasn't, unfortunately, led to any real progress in the larger peace negotiations. It's kind of a reminder that even in really dark times, there can be these moments of hope, but the fundamental disagreements driving the conflict remain deeply rooted and unresolved.
Yeah, a tough situation all around. Okay, let's take a quick look at some other international news that's been making headlines. Sounds like there's been a lot happening beyond just the major conflicts we've discussed.
Indeed. It's easy to get focused on one or two big stories, but the world keeps spinning. For instance, we saw a very tense situation unfold between India and Pakistan earlier in May.
Oh, yeah, what happened?
There was actually a brief military conflict sparked by terrorist attacks in Kashmir. It escalated quickly with airstrikes and even missile exchanges.
Wow.
Raising serious concerns about a potential nuclear escalation between the two.
That's incredibly scary.
Hugely scary. Thankfully, a ceasefire agreement was reached on May 10th. Reports say U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance played a role in mediating that.
Okay, good.
And a key part of the agreement is apparently that Pakistan will cease support for anti-India terrorism operating from its soil. While there have been some smaller clashes since then, this ceasefire is being seen as a really important step in calming tensions in a very, very volatile region.
Phew. That's a relief that things seem to have de-escalated, at least for now. What else is going on around the globe?
There was also a ceasefire agreement reached on May 6th between the U.S. and Yemen's Houthi rebels. Oman acted as the mediator there.
Okay, stopping the fighting in Yemen.
Well, specifically stopping the U.S. airstrikes against Houthi targets that had been ongoing since March. And in return, the Houthis agreed to stop their attacks on U.S. ships in the Red Sea area.
Ah, okay. But only U.S. ships.
Interestingly, yes. Reports indicate this agreement apparently doesn't include attacks on Israeli-linked shipping. But some analysts are suggesting this ceasefire, even limited, could be a small step towards potential progress in the broader U.S.-Iran nuclear talks.
Interesting potential connection there. What about Japan? They're a huge player in global trade. What's their take on everything that's happening internationally, especially with U.S. trade policy?
Yeah, Japan has voiced some pretty strong concerns recently, especially regarding the uncertainty surrounding U.S. trade policy, and particularly President Trump's proposed tariffs.
They're worried about the global economy.
Exactly. They believe this uncertainty could really hurt the global economy and potentially cause a slowdown. Japan is specifically pushing hard for the complete removal of the 25% tariff on its auto exports to the U.S.
Not just a reduction.
No, they've made it clear they're not interested in any partial deals. They want it gone completely. This really shows their active role in these trade discussions and how they're trying to protect their vital auto industry and overall economic stability from potential negative impacts of U.S. protectionism. It's a warning that definitely carries weight, given Japan's economic influence.
Makes sense they'd be worried, considering how interconnected everything is, especially cars. What about in Europe? Anything noteworthy happening there besides the big stuff?
Yes, Spain and the UK are still locked in negotiations regarding the post-Brexit arrangements for Gibraltar.
Ah, Gibraltar. Still sorting that out.
Still sorting it out.
Yeah.
They're trying to reach an agreement on things like how the border between Gibraltar and Spain will work border fluidity and how they'll cooperate economically. The talks are focused on Gibraltar's status, those border checks, trade rules. But there are still some really tricky issues. Spain's long-standing claims of sovereignty over Gibraltar and the UK's insistence on Gibraltar's autonomy and self-governance.
Right. Complex history there.
Very. And the relationship between Gibraltar as a British overseas territory and its only land neighbor, Spain, is important for both European politics and trade. So the outcome of these talks could have wider regional effects on stability.
Okay. Now, this next one, this sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie. Reports of a mysterious metal structure found under the ice in Antarctica. Tell me more. Is it aliens?
Well, this claim popped up around April 10th, 2025. The story was that an international team of scientists had discovered this strange metal structure buried deep under the Antarctic ice.
Okay.
Initial reports claimed it could be thousands of years old and maybe made of metals not typically found on Earth, which, of course, immediately sparked all sorts of wild theories. Alien civilizations, ancient lost technology, maybe just some unusual natural phenomenon.
Right, the internet probably went crazy.
Totally. There were even reports that joint expeditions from the U.S., Russia, and China were being quickly dispatched to investigate further, with plans for excavation and using AI to analyze whatever it was.
Sounds like the plot from a summer blockbuster, right?
It really does. Whoa, that's quite a story. But, you know, my gut is telling me to take this with a huge pillar of salt, maybe an entire salt mine. What's the real scoop here? Is there anything to it?
Well, it's always a good idea to be skeptical of extraordinary claims like this one. And when you look closer, some pretty big red flags start waving frantically.
Like what?
First off, the reports making this claim don't actually name any specific scientific institutions or research teams involved. It's always just an international team. Very vague.
Yeah, not a good sign.
No. Secondly, there's been absolutely no official announcement or publication about this in any respected scientific journals like Nature or Science or even credible mainstream news outlets. Nothing from the BBC, Reuters, AP silence.
The language used in the initial reports also tends to be very vague and sensational. Phrases like mysterious structure, different from Earth metals, possibly alien. It's designed to grab headlines, not convey scientific fact.
Right. Classic clickbait language. And what about any actual proof? Has anyone credible, anyone at all, confirmed this?
Nope. As of today, May 23rd, 2025, 0 reliable scientific sources have backed up this claim. This complete lack of confirmation from trustworthy sources is a pretty strong indicator that it's likely. Well, not true.
Yeah.
We've seen similar stories pop up before. Remember those mysterious metal monoliths that appeared in random places a few years ago?
Oh, yeah, the monoliths. What happened with those?
They mostly turned out to be art projects or elaborate hoaxes. So, based on the total lack of evidence, it's very, very probable that this mysterious metal structure in Antarctica claim doesn't have any solid backing either. Fun story, though.
Okay, so probably no alien artifacts under the ice just yet. Disappointing, but probably for the best. How about this kangaroo drone delivery service in Australia? That sounds kind of fun and maybe actually real.
Okay, so the claim here is that an Australian startup launched these kangaroo drone delivery services, specifically targeting remote indigenous communities.
Delivering what?
Important stuff like medical supplies, other essentials. The unique part of the story was the idea that the drone was designed to mimic the hopping motion of a kangaroo for stable flight over rough terrain.
A hopping drone? Seriously?
That was the claim, and the reports even said it was a big success, with thousands of deliveries already completed, and it was being praised by the UN as a great model for solving logistics challenges in remote areas.
A drone that hops like a kangaroo? That's a pretty creative, if slightly bizarre, design concept. But is this actually a widespread thing? Are these hopping drones blanketing the outback?
Well, again, while the idea is definitely interesting, maybe even amusing, when you dig just a little deeper, The reality seems to be a bit different. There's no major news outlet or credible source that specifically mentions a widely operating kangaroo drone delivery service, by that name, in remote Australia.
Okay. But are drones being used for deliveries there?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Drone delivery services are becoming more common in Australia, especially for reaching those remote communities with medical supplies, food, other necessities. That part is true.
Which companies are doing it?
Companies like Wing Aviation, that's part of Google's parent company, Alphabet, and another one called Swoop Aero. They are approved to operate in certain areas, like around Canberra and parts of Queensland. And there have even been some reports mentioning that drone designs in Australia have occasionally taken inspiration from local animals.
Okay, so the idea of using drones for deliveries in remote Australia is definitely real. Wing and Swoop Aero are doing it. But the kangaroo drone part might be more of a, descriptive nickname or maybe a specific prototype rather than an official service or a widespread technology that actually hops.
That seems most likely. It's probably more like calling a certain type of delivery truck a roadrunner because it's fast, rather than it actually being designed by Acme.
Gotcha.
So while drone delivery is certainly making progress in remote parts of Australia, the idea that it's a sweeping phenomenon, especially involving hopping drones, is likely an overstatement. These services are still largely in trial phases with somewhat limited coverage. So the concept of a kangaroo-inspired drone is cool, but the current reality of drone delivery in Australia is probably a bit more, well, down to earth, so to speak.
Down to earth drone delivery. Okay, well, that was quite the whirlwind tour of international news and weird science claims. We covered everything from trade disputes and new U.S. laws to potential alien discoveries that weren't, and maybe hopping delivery drones. It really shows you how much is happening all over the world all the time.
It certainly does, and it really highlights how quickly things can change on a global scale and how fast information, sometimes misinformation, can spread.
Absolutely. And as we've definitely seen with some of these stories today, while a lot of the news out there is fascinating, it is just so important to approach it with a critical eye. You got to do a little fact-checking yourself sometimes. Sometimes even we can stumble across information that isn't entirely accurate or lacks context. So we always encourage you, our listeners, to think critically. If something sounds a little too wild, a little too good, or maybe just a little too weird to be true.
Like hopping drones or alien metals.
Exactly. Maybe just do a quick search online, see if you can verify it independently from a few reliable sources. You know how it is with the internet. You can find pretty much anything out there, true or not. It's on us to be discerning.
That's excellent advice. I couldn't agree more. In today's world, where information just bombards us constantly and spreads so rapidly, having that healthy dose of skepticism and being willing to look for reliable sources is more important than ever.
Totally. And on that note, if you've enjoyed this deep dive into the latest headlines, the weird and the serious, make sure to subscribe to Sip and Talk wherever you get your podcasts.
Please do.
And hey, while you're at it, you got to check out our old buddy Micky's YouTube channel. Seriously, folks, that guy is an absolute goldmine of hilarious internet meme shorts.
Oh, Micky's channel's the best.
Isn't it? Some of them are pure comedic genius. You know how you're just scrolling through your feed, minding your own business, and suddenly, bam, Micky's dropped another gem that just makes you snort your coffee.
Yeah, that happens a lot.
Yeah, that's him. It's honestly the perfect way to unwind after trying to keep up with all the serious global news we just talked about. A little geopolitical tension, followed by a cat playing a keyboard poorly. Balance.
A perfect balance.
All right, until next time, keep sipping and keep talking.
Cheers, everyone. See you next time.